Hey everyone, I'm the Real Evab, and this is part 1 of 3 of a series on how to play Guardian. Uh, in this series, this mini-series, um, it has 3 parts to adequately cover the 3 major mechanics of Guardian, that being gems, stasis, and defensive mode. Right now we will be doing gems today, partially because that's the one that I fully understand how to explain to people, I think. Next two I will have to do a lot more preparation for, and I'm not sure how much there will be to talk about. Gems, there are a lot of possibilities. Uh, there are a lot of possibilities for how you socket the gems in each card. So, real quick, I just want to give a little bit of a refresher on the gems that are available. There are 4 common gems: Ruby, Emerald, Tourmaline, and Sapphire, giving temporary strength, dexterity, thorns, and Sapphire bracing for 4. There are 6 uncommon gems: Garnet, Amber, Amethyst, Quartz, Fragmented Gem, and Aquamarine. Garnet and Amethyst apply debuffs to the enemy, vulnerable and temporary loss of strength, like a piercing wail. Amber and Quartz affect the cards that you get in your hand. Amber accelerating cards from stasis, and Quartz drawing a card. And Fragmented Gem and Aquamarine being 2 sides of the same coin, generating a card, a Shiv and a Ward, respectively. And then there are 2 rare cards, rare gems. Citrine, which gains an energy, and Onyx, which reduces all of your debuffs by 1. It's worth noting real quick that these gems cannot be upgraded in any way. And of course, I'm just going to click this just to show, there are a lot of socketed cards. There are more socketed cards than there are gems. A total of 17. One is a starter card, Twin Slam. We'll talk about that a bit later, but this is probably one of Guardian's strongest cards. I'm glad it's in the starting kit. There are, it seems, 10 commons with sockets, 4 uncommons with sockets, and 2 rares with sockets. And this is after the patch, so we have 2 new ones joining the crew. Strike for Strike Plus, well, I guess Plus because, alright, I'll get to that in a second, and Ancient Power. Both of these already had sockets, even when unupgraded. The reason I have all of these cards upgraded is partially because it was easier, but also because a few of these actually have extra sockets when upgraded, such as Twin Slam, Planning, Bobble Burst, Exploit Gems. I think that's it. Yeah, Suspension upgrades to draw a card. So, real quick, let's dive right into this. I prepared a set of notes for myself and for you. So let's see what we've got here. You may notice I have this warning up in the top right. Do not click. This cleans everything up from the canvas. If I wanted to erase something, I have to use this. So I needed a reminder so that I don't accidentally erase everything here. This took somewhere between half hour and an hour to write. I don't want to lose it. So, starting on the left here, if you want to read along. Gems are secondary card upgrades with risk involved. What this means is that you are upgrading cards with sockets by putting gems in them. It is a sort of specialized upgrade in which you can put basically whatever you want in them, restricted by only the gems that you have in your deck, of course. So it's really important to have gems be a part of your deck so long as you have socketed cards, because giving those cards extra value, especially with the flexibility of gems, can end up being very powerful for multiple reasons. The risk involved, of course, is that in order to socket gems in these cards, you need to be able to take gems in your deck. And since gems are 0 cost cards, which are very low impact, the risk, of course, is... Not of course. I'm going to not say that. The risk is that having a zero cost card in your deck that's low impact means that you're drawing a card that's not going to do very much. And also, if you have extra energy, it kind of amplifies that problem because you're not using your energy most efficiently. For energy, if you draw 5 cards in your hand, like normal, one of them is a gem and 4 of them are 1-cost cards, you can play all the 1-cost cards, but you lose that extra bit of control over what you play. For example, if you're up against an enemy that is attacking, and you have 4 energy, but you have very little block in your hand, you'll still play all 4 of your 1-cost cards most of the time, but still not to be able to block, because that 5th card is the gem that we just mentioned. So yeah, having the 5th card in your hand would most likely increase your chance of being able to block that turn. And it feels pretty much just as bad on turns that they're not attacking and you draw multiple cards that block. And same scenario, you play all your 1-cost cards, but you block for a bunch and it doesn't do anything. Meanwhile, having that 5th card, which isn't a gem, would have given you better chances of having a draw that you can actually take advantage of the downturn. So yeah, the risk involved there is just losing a card draw. And of course, depending on the context, like having extra energy can be more or less punishing, but overall there is still risk involved. If we can just take another look at these real quick. I'll erase this for a second. If you take a look at these, they're not very high. Like I said, they're not very high impact cards. Ward gives you only 3 block. Shiv gives you only 4 damage. Of course, if you don't have the proper buffs to make these stronger. All of these don't give you very much on their own. There's a few cards that would maybe be okay to have. Garnet could be fine if you draw a hand of attacks. Amber can sometimes do things on its own. Amethyst is a little bit iffy because it's actually weaker than an Aquamarine in some situations. You would have to get, I suppose, unlucky for an enemy to be multi-attacking you or to be attacked by multiple enemies in a multi-enemy fight in order for Amethyst to block more than an Aquamarine. Quartz, however, is not a risk most of the time. There are a couple exceptions, like Time Eater, or more specifically Watcher 3 if you're playing in Downfall mode, which both do not like you playing extra cards. So Quartz can be bad for that reason. And also against Gremlin Knob, since that is a skill. Citrine can maybe be useful unsocketed, depending on the cost of the cards in your deck, but it's kind of iffy. And Onyx is extremely situational to begin. Well, not extremely situational. Very situational, I would say. So drawing that is still kind of can end up being a bad thing. So overall, I think these are more risk than not. I think the least risky would be Quartz, Amber, and then in second place to those would be Garnet and Aquamarine. But overall, still risk involved. So what you need to do is make sure that whenever you take a gem, you have a socket to put it in. If there is risk involved. If you've taken a look at your deck and it's not actually a risk based on the context of what you've taken, like for example the Amber if you have a bunch of stasis, or a Ward if you have a lot of dex generation, it wouldn't be so bad. Or of course the gems that we mentioned before that are less risk inherently. But if you do have that risk involved, the biggest thing that you need to keep track of is where the campfires are on the map and your pathing. Making sure that there is a campfire in your path with socketed cards means that you can get that gem out of your deck and put it into another card, so that you no longer have that low impact zero cost draw, that you now have augmented another card with that. The minus Q is just to remind me of mentioning the Quartz, since that draws a card. It's the exact same as if you had just drawn another card instead, since it replaces itself. So, of course, it's partially keeping an eye on where the campfires are in your path, and also planning ahead to have campfires in your path so that you can make use of gems. Because gems are very strong. So that even if you don't have them at the time that you're planning your path, having that option available to you will make you strong in the cases that you get them, and those are not too rare. So keeping yourself flexible and planning for this possibility is a great way to make sure that you're taking advantage of possible win conditions or possible conditions where you get stronger as much as possible. Another advantage of gems is that they increase deck efficiency. Of course, by removing a card from your deck and putting its effect into another card, you have essentially made your deck smaller while still keeping the effects of the gem. So, and of course, if you're taking gems along the way, then you will naturally be socketing them into your cards and making your deck smaller than other characters would. I think I credit that as to why my Guardian decks usually end up in the mid-20s range whenever it comes to the number of cards. Whenever you take gems and taking other cards, you're basically taking less by the time that you got them socketed. It's kind of like why card removes in general are good. Getting rid of your worst cards. But in this case, the gems are also simultaneously making other cards better. Now, if you're thinking that you could just not take gems, well, I think that it's still important to take, and that would still be just as efficient. I think it's still important to take them because they will make your deck stronger, same as any other card. So I do think that it does actually increase efficiency. Resting is more viable, simply because this is a secondary way to upgrade cards, as I said before. So at rest sites, you usually want to get as strong as possible. So smithing cards is extremely important in order to get stronger. You don't rest. The best players don't rest as often as beginner players, because getting stronger will save you more HP in the long run than resting saves you in the short run. It is sometimes necessary to rest to make sure you don't die immediately, but HP is a resource to help you get stronger, as much as it is a condition for you not to lose the run. So right now I'm at 68 HP, of course. Yes, of course. Because this is the beginning of the run. This is floor 1. I've just rigged this up to be the way it is. That means I have, at maximum, 67 HP to spend on the entire act. I can spend it on hallway fight. You can spend it on fights, basically, and I guess a few different events. You spend them on fights to get cards, gold, and potions. You spend them on elites to get all of that, plus relics and better chances at rare cards. So, using your HP as a resource is important. But if you've dropped a bit too low and you are afraid that you are going to die in the immediate future, resting is sometimes a necessity. And if it becomes a necessity, gems can still be there for you, because gems are a free action. You do not have to use up a campfire to enhance your socketed cards. And this is great because if you're resting, you're not smithing, which means you're not getting stronger. But in the case of Guardian, you can still get stronger with enhancing. It's a little bit less impactful than smithing, I think, in most scenarios. If you have really good gems, then enhancing can be just as good or better. But of but it's better to have the Enhance and the Smith together if you can afford it. It's just the fact that because it's a free action, you're not punished as much by resting. Speaking of enhancing being a free action, the one thing you do have to remember is that enhancing socketed cards with gems has to be done before choosing any of these other options. You cannot smith first, or rest first, or recall first, or whatever other relic gives you a campfire option before enhancing. The enhancing always has to be first. So it's almost a free action because, as we saw before, Twin Slam, Planning, Bobble Burst, and Exploit gems all get an extra socket from upgrading them. This starts at 1, this starts at 1, this starts at 1, and this starts at 2. So if you have, say, 3 gems and an Exploit gems that isn't upgraded, you can only put 2 of those gems into Exploit gems. Because when you upgrade, you can't enhance anymore. It's not available as an option. You have to wait until the next campfire. So that's a little bit of a quirk that you have to keep in mind whenever you're thinking about your gems. You have to sort of plan ahead on these in particular. Take an upgrade that does basically nothing, except for Twin Slam, which gives you 2 extra damage on the upgrade as well, in the hopes that, or in the knowledge that you will have gems to socket in that other socket later, or by the next campfire. In my own episodes, I often, well, at least in the last 10 episodes, whenever I started going up the Spire, there have been several cases where taking a gem around at the boss or at the beginning of an act is not a good idea, because you have to wait several floors before your first campfire. The earliest a campfire can spawn is the 6th floor of an act. So you'd be holding on to gems and risking a bad draw every floor up until then. Sometimes that's okay if there's a bunch of events in the way. There are still chances of fighting monsters in those events. But usually waiting until you've hit that first campfire so that you don't have as long to go until the next campfire is probably a better time to upgrade these cards that give you an extra socket. So that's important to keep in mind. And in the same vein, Pick of Rhapsody is not free, because that also gives you another campfire option to gain gems. So that even kind of amplifies the problem, because it gives you gems and then you can't socket them immediately. And of course they're random, so you're taking on gems that may or may not be good in the hopes that, either you can make something good with them, or at the very least, just make your deck a little bit stronger in some way. It's a very marginal benefit, unless you're prepared to take the risk and take advantage of whatever comes out of it. That doesn't usually take a lot of planning. It just, as long as it's early in the game and you have a lot of possibilities open to you, at that point you can maybe take whatever gems come out and then find good things to socket them in to best make use of their abilities. You don't have to do something like look at each individual gem and ask yourself if you're prepared for exactly that gem if it shows up. That's way too difficult, at least at this point, to figure out. So that's all the general stuff to know about gems. Onto the specifics. Over here on the right are my personal tips on what is the best way to make use of your gems. I don't have this fully figured out. I will say that. I think I have it mostly figured out, but fully figured out, it would be disingenuous to say so. Because there are just so many possibilities. The ways that I've personally identified to use gems have worked out have given me a lot of opportunities to get stronger in ways that actually feel good to use the gems. So I'm pretty confident that these ways will help, even if it's not a complete explanation. So first things first, it's fine to experiment. If you're at a loss at which cards should have which gems socketed in them, it's fine to just put the gems in anything most of the time. You'll still get the benefits of those gems. You'll be removing them from your deck so that you don't have those zero cost cards that eat up your draws. Most of the time, just having gems in general will make your deck stronger. So, it could be just even fun to throw a bunch of random stuff into your cards and see what happens, and then maybe focus more on your gameplay in each individual fight rather than the card drafting. A little bit skewed in favor of the individual fight gameplay rather than drafting. Overall, I think it's fine to do this. Don't stress yourself out over figuring out exactly what is correct, because we're gonna get into a bunch of different ways to make gems work. If you want to use these tips, basically learn at your own pace and don't be afraid to just do whatever the heck you want with them. So that being said, let's start with what I've found gems are good for. The first category is covering weaknesses. These socketed cards can have varied weaknesses attached to them just because of how Slay the Spire plays and their own individual design. I'm going to take a quick look at these cards. So for example, Roll Attack is a pretty big one. It's a 2-cost card it's a 2-cost attack card. And that means that a couple of its weaknesses are it's expensive, so you can help mitigate that downside by putting a Citrine, the energy gem, into Roll Attack to make it refund 1 energy, and essentially make it a 1-cost card. Another way is to maybe put a Ward gem, the Aquamarine, into Roll Attack, because it is an attack and it's expensive. Spending your turn playing a mostly damaged card can leave you vulnerable to enemies that are attacking on that turn. So having that ward makes it slightly more likely that you're able to block well that turn, and making you less susceptible to taking damage because you're allowed to play that damage card. Of course, wards are only 3 block, but often that can make the difference. Before this recent patch, ward was a common gem. The Aquamarine was a common gem, so putting wards into cards was actually quite easy. Now that it's an uncommon, it's a little bit harder to do. Overall, I still think it's a great one for Wall Attack. I think there's one more weakness of Roll Attack. Let's take a look at the gems again real quick. I guess Amethyst could also be acceptable, because if you're spending 2 energy on a card, then the enemy could be multi-attacking, and then Amethyst would help mitigate that because you've already spent 2 energy on attacks. So I don't think Amethyst is very good without being multiplied most of the time. I'll get to that later, but I think that's an acceptable gem to put into Roll Attack. And I guess that's it. I don't think any of these other ones are particularly amazing. In fact, some of them are downright bad. For example, if you were to put a Ruby into Roll Attack, Ruby giving you 2 temporary strength is only good if you play attacks after the card. It will not give you 2 strength for the Roll Attack, making it a 22 damage card, or an 18 if it's unupgraded. Emerald could maybe be it if you don't need wards in your deck. You have because you have a bunch of other block cards. I suppose putting an emerald in it could help, because whatever leftover energy you have during the turn, you can use to block. Just a thought. Tourmaline for more damage, not really. We'll get to Sapphire later because that's another unique thing. Amber, you could maybe make a case for Amber because accelerating a card, if it successfully draws a card out of stasis, it will cost 0, which means that you get basically an extra energy during the turn to play that card specifically. So if it's a block card, then you're covered in case you're attacked. That's a little bit of a crazy conditional, though. It has to be 1 turn left in stasis, and it has to be a block card. A little bit inconsistent, but I guess still a possibility. Quartz is another really bad one. You do not want a 2-cost draw 1 card. Unless you also have Citrine attached to it, in which case that might be okay, but Roll Attack only has 1 socket, so you'd have to choose. And honestly, I'd rather choose the Citrine. So yeah, that's one way you can cover weaknesses. Wait, I wanted to go over the other ones as well. Roll Attack, I can kind of segue into the other common attacks of Guardian's card pool. Incinerate, Priming Shot, Reroute, Strike for Strike, Temporal Strike. A lot of these cards are just common damage cards, common attacks. Having block in them makes them less susceptible for the same reasons that Roll Attack makes you... having it in Roll Attack would make you less susceptible. For the patch, I would regularly put wards in each of these cards, and they would help quite a bit with consistency and not leaking HP, or at leaking as much HP. You can also make an argument to put Quartz in 1-cost, in these 1-cost common attacks, because in sort of the same way that Pommel Strike is a good card for Ironclad, having that extra available draw to make you more consistent later in the game. It can be fine here too. The only problem is that you're spending 1 energy for 1 draw. It's definitely mitigating the downside of the card, but it's not good, I would say. I would say it's not strong to do that. Pommel Strike has the unique advantage that you can upgrade it to draw 2. Can't do that here. I will say, though, that putting Quartz in Temporal Strike, which gains an energy if you have a card in stasis, is a lot better because it is essentially a 0-cost card. And for the same reason, putting Quartz into Planning and Suspension can be good, because those are also low impact cards. Well, not also. They are low impact cards. As opposed to having common attacks, which at least do damage and have these other effects. These are 0-cost cards, which do not do very much on the turn you play them. In fact, they might not do anything at all because they specifically put something into stasis. So having Quartz in them means that you basically turn it into what some players call a cantrip, which is just a name for 0-cost draw 1. And it's called a cantrip, I think, as a reference to some other magical system. It might be Dungeons and Dragons, where you basically get a free action to use a cantrip. Don't quote me on that. I have not played Dungeons and Dragons in a long time, and the time I did, I did not really understand a lot. But anyway, they're called cantrips because they're a free action in this game. You get whatever effect is on the card, and you draw a card. You don't lose energy. You don't lose your draw. After you play this, you're still going to have 5 cards in your hand if that's the first card you played that turn. So, yeah, that covers the weakness of the card because you're not, because much like gems, they're low impact 0-cost cards which can eat a draw. But here you are mitigating their downside. Suspension, you can already upgrade to draw a card, so it actually becomes positive if you draw positive if you attach a Quartz to it and upgrade it, because then it will draw 2 cards. The only quirk about this is that sockets always happen at the end of a card, so it draws a card, then you can play a card in your put a card from your hand into stasis, then you draw another card. Weird order. Planning is also a little bit quirky because you're putting the top 2 cards of your draw pile into stasis, then drawing a card. So you're really drawing the 3rd card off your draw pile rather than the first one. Sometimes that matters. Most of the time it's not going to matter very much. The order, it's going to have the same odds of drawing whatever card, no matter which order it was in. But sometimes if you have something like pre-program, which lets you see the top cards of the draw pile, you would not be able to draw the top card with planning. Frozen Eye would also be another case of that. Or if you have a very small draw pile, because you've gone through most of your cards and you know you're going to draw most of the time, that can also be a case. So, just a little bit quirky. Overall, I think still a positive to do that. And planning got better this update because of all the extra accelerate. One of the biggest problems with planning was that it takes up 2 of your 3 stasis slots for multiple turns. But now I don't think that'll be as much of an issue. I suppose putting a draw into Incinerate, you know what, I'll talk about that later because it actually does something else good for us. Vent Steam is the last one I really want to talk about, I think. Piercing Hide, being a block card, doesn't really have weaknesses. Not doing damage is not necessarily weakness because usually over time you are creating damage engines which scale up over time. So having one card that has, like, if you put a shiv into this, it's not going to be very good unless you have like a ton of strength and absolutely need another attack somewhere in your deck. Most of the time this is going to be just giving you block and brace and a bit of thorns and not much else. So it doesn't really have a weakness to cover, I don't think. Maybe you can make an argument for something. I'm not going to try and find it right now. But Vent Steam is kind of exaggerating the problem of the common attack cards even further. Not only does it not block, which means that you could draw it on the turn that you're susceptible to damage, it also doesn't even do damage itself. It is itself a setup card. It enables other cards to do things, specifically attacks to do more damage. So if you draw this against a turn where the enemy is attacking and your other cards are block cards, you block with 3 other cards. You block with other cards, and then you play Vent Steam. Vent Steam has done nothing that turn. So that can be helped by also putting Ward into it. Ward being nerfed to uncommon this update was really needed because it's good in most situations. It's not severely impactful, but still very useful in most situations. Similarly, though, you can also put Quartz into this to help mitigate the downside of it. And that even helps its setup nature, because if you draw a card, then you have another chance to draw damage, and then be able to use the vulnerable with the damage that you have. So it can kind of do multiple things there. I think that's it. Let me check my notes here real quick on the side. Oh yeah, Amethyst, of course, as the other damage mitigation gem, the one that removes 2 strength from all enemies temporarily. That can be just as valid of an option. Let's see. The last thing I wanted to say, of course, the last thing I wanted to say is about Citrine. If your deck overall has energy problems, Citrine can help with that. And I guess that leads me to the last point of covering weaknesses. Sometimes your deck overall will have a weakness. Block cards, the wards, strategy that I talked about to help individual cards can also be applied to your entire deck. If you have not yet found a defensive system, putting wards into a bunch of cards can help. That was a strategy that I used very often before it got nerfed. I don't think that'll be as viable anymore. But yeah, that could be a defensive system along with dexterity. And that, like I said, I did that very often, especially with Gem Finder. In past 10 episodes, I think I did that a few times, where I put a bunch of wards into cards and then put dexterity into a couple, and that gave me usually enough block to survive. So yeah, you can. So if you're lacking a block system, you can use gems to fix that. You can also, in theory, do that with. Damage. Sometimes it is necessary to start socketing rubies into your cards in order to have the extra damage you need in order to kill things. It's a little bit less effective because as the game goes on, enemies have more and more HP, to the point in which you kind of need some kind of, in a way, exponential scaling. You need to bounce attacks off of strength and vulnerable. You maybe need to play more cards in a turn, and all those multiply together to do enough damage overall in a fight. So socketing rubies is a little bit less effective than socketing dexterity and wards, because even though the enemy's HP goes up, the attacks that come into you are not as, they do not require that level of exponential scaling. They're a lot slower to get stronger, and that makes sense because you only have somewhere between 50 and 100 HP, max HP most of the game. So, and the game is balanced around that. So overall, making a defensive system at least was a lot more viable than making an offensive system. But you know, I've done a couple things where even if I didn't have rubies socketed, I recently had an episode where I socketed a couple of fragmented gems, one being in Twin Slam and one in Temporal Strike. I made this a 2-cost 4x attack, and this became a 0-cost 2x attack. And both of those are really efficient. And I had other sources of strength than rubies. I think I used Orb Walk, which is the power that can be put into stasis to give you strength and then be played for a little bit more strength. So having these as strength dumps ended up being very good. But on the flip side, now that we have, what is it called? Now that we have Sapphire in the common pool, we could use an alternate strategy. Sapphire bracing for 4, we can rely a lot. We can maybe, in theory, make a deck where we make a lot more use of defensive mode as a block system, and that is very viable as well. As long as you're able to go into defensive mode regularly, that will continue to give you block as well as keep block in between turns. So even if you draw block on the wrong turns, you will be able to keep them for the turns that you need them. So defensive mode can absolutely be a block system. So it could be viable to put Sapphires into a lot of cards and then just keep entering defensive mode over and over to solve your block problems. And I guess I never really thought about it before, but maybe as a damage system, it'd be better to do Tourmaline over Ruby and then just have a bunch of Thorns all the time. I'm not exactly sure how effective that would be. We already talked a little bit about how putting a Ruby into an attack card is not very good because it won't buff that attack card, it will only buff ones after it. But Tourmaline has this, has the property of not only having more damage attached to it, in theory, but it doesn't buff other attacks, which means that you don't have to care about the play order. So if you are really hurting for damage and you need a damage system, based on gems. Maybe if you have Gem Finder, like I said before, you can socket Tourmaline into a bunch of things and then rely on Thorns for, I guess, supplementary damage. Overall, I don't think that this would be enough to save you, but it would certainly help if you're hurting for damage. I was going to say something else. I don't remember. The other gems here. Amber could be used to cover a deck weakness where you have too much stasis stuff and you need to get stuff out of stasis in order to free up room, or even just to play more cards a turn. Amber can help a lot with that. Yeah, that's pretty much it. I guess Garnet could also be used to increase your damage output with attacks. Of course, being an uncommon gem, you need to have multiple of them for that to happen. So, yeah, I think that's about it for covering weaknesses, both in your individual cards and your overall deck needs. So, just to recap, putting block on cards is usually pretty good, whether it be Ward or the negative strength Piercing Whale one, or maybe even sometimes using Brace to enter defensive mode more frequently. And for low impact, putting a Quartz into zero-cost cards, and Temporal Strike being an honorary zero-cost card can mitigate the downsides of drawing low-impact cards by replacing itself. And the same can, of course, be said for the one-cost common attacks, or I guess even the Piercing Hide, being the one-cost common block card. Drawing a card to replace itself, even though you spend an energy, can still be very good for you. Overall, I think, if you can't tell already, Quartz is a pretty good gem, and it's only going to keep getting better as we keep talking about this. And to recap deck needs, if your deck is lacking something, whether damage or block or scaling, you can use gems to socket most of your cards to overall solve the problem. For example, the Brace card to maybe enter defensive mode more frequently as a block option, or putting Thorns into your cards for supplementary damage. Dexterity can also still be one if you have block cards just in your deck. And Strength can sometimes be a thing too. So all four of the common gems, especially because it can be useful if your deck needs that bit of extra boost. So on to amplifying strengths. Sort of the other side of covering weaknesses, gems can also be used to make cards better at what they are doing already. There is an area in between where gems are just not very good at either. As I said, Ruby in a common attack card, probably not very good. It doesn't cover its weakness or amplify its strength. It just it doesn't do either. In order to figure out how to amplify, in order to really understand how you amplify card strengths with gems, there's two different categories here. There's a setup category and a payoff category. So, setup category is what I would classify stuff like Ruby, Emerald, Tourmaline, Garnet, stuff like that for. Anything that benefits from you playing cards after it is what I would call a setup card. So, I guess Tourmaline doesn't really matter, because that relies on enemy intent. But Ruby is a setup card because it helps you play attack cards, same with Garnet. Emerald is a setup card because it helps you play defensive cards. Amber is another one, and so is Quartz for similar reasons. Amber can get you cards out of stasis for free and allow you to play those cards for extra value during your turn. And Quartz can draw extra cards, giving you extra value during that turn as well. Citrine is in a similar vein as well, allowing you to play more cards simply on the fact that you have more energy to play them. So I guess 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these 12 gems I would classify as a setup gem. And if you're going to amplify a strength of a socketed card with setup gems, you need setup socketed cards. These zero cost cards, including Temporal Strike, are not just useful with quartz to make them cantrips. They are also very useful for just socketing these setup cards into, because if you spend 0 energy on something, that means you have more cards to play after that. You have the ability to play more cards after that because you have the energy for them. So that kind of lines up with these other setup gems. So if I spend 0 energy and gain 2 strength with a planning or a suspension, or even Temporal Strike, because this is still technically a 0 cost, then the rest of the cards during the turn will benefit from that extra strength, or the dexterity, or the vulnerable. And then the other 3, Amber, Quartz, and Citrine, will all allow you to play more cards during the turn. So these can become cheap ways to enhance the rest of your turn in that way instead. What else can we do? I guess Piercing Hide can also be a setup card, since it is safe, giving you block. It can be easily used at the beginning of a turn, and in most turns, because unlike common attacks, you are safe in the knowledge that if you draw this, you can play it in most scenarios. If the enemy is attacking, you can't really... if the enemy is attacking, you're going to want to prioritize blocking that attack. So attacks become less common, but block cards can pretty much always be played with minimal downside. So this can also be a setup card. You can also put, so for the same reasons, you can put Ruby, Emerald, Garnet, all those things that we mentioned before into it, and it will be pretty solid, I think. Vent Steam is another setup card. As we mentioned before, it does nothing by itself, but it does enhance the rest of your cards. So something I like to do, actually, is put 2 rubies into this. It's a lot of fun, in Act 1 especially, to have 2 rubies in Vent Steam and then draw like a Walker Claw with it. Walker Claw being the 2-cost 3/4 hit, the 3/4 multi-hit card. So a Vent Steam with an upgraded Walker Claw and 4 strength would do, let's see, 5 plus 4 strength is 9. 9 times 1.5 for vulnerable is 13 after you round down. 13 times 4 is 52 damage for 3 energy. Overall, great combo. Really enhances what Vent Steam is good at. And in a similar vein, you can even sort of mix the covering weaknesses and amplifying strengths. Since this is, well, this one specifically you want to put strength into to amplify the strength, but you can do, you could also put dexterity into it to enhance your block cards. Because like I said earlier, if you draw that card during the turn where the enemy's attacking, it's not going to be very good. But if you put a dexterity gem into it and you've drawn other block cards, then you can play the Vent Steam and be safe because you've given yourself more block from the block cards that you drew, while still enhancing your damage for the next 1 or 2 turns. And overall, I think that's very good. And for the same reasons, the other setup gems are good. Even Garnet can be good. Obviously, this is an upgraded card right now, but in the case that it's not upgraded, it only applies to vulnerable. So putting a Garnet into it could be like a way to upgrade it without upgrading it, meaning that you can spend your campfires upgrading other cards or resting if you need to. Or you can put the Garnet into Vent Steam Plus for 4 vulnerable. That can be very viable as a way to make sure that the vulnerable on the enemy stays there the entire fight. It especially depends on your deck size. 4 turns of vulnerable works very well in 20 card decks, I would say maybe even 25, because then you would only have one turn of downtime from vulnerable. And Amber for accelerate, Quartz for draw, and Citrine for energy can also be great to allow you to play more cards after you play the Vent Steam. Vent Steam being vulnerable enhances your damage by a lot. This is probably one of the best common cards in Guardian's kit. 50% extra damage is huge, especially for such a cheap cost, and for multiple turns. So having all that extra setup on Vent Steam can really can amplify its power by quite a bit. And as I mentioned before, especially with damage, you need to combine a lot of different multipliers on your damage to kind of exponentially grow. Vulnerable and strength and more cards played per turn are all very common ways for that to happen. So, adding those amplifications to Vent Steam makes it just that more powerful. I haven't really talked about these other cards as much. Exploit Gems is a great setup card for the same reason that these are. Exploit Gems is itself a cantrip, so putting other setup stuff into it can really enable the rest of your turn. And honestly, I think it's the best use of Exploit Gems to do so. You could put any gem into it and it would be fine, but I do think it is strongest whenever you put other setup gems into it, so that the rest of your turn is as good as possible. Especially because cards that draw other cards like to be played first in your turn anyways. So just multiple reasons to do that. Looking at these are not really setup cards, for the fact that they have multiple gem slots and are also block and damage. They're usually the ones benefiting from that, and we'll get to that in a minute. But Ancient Power and Reprogram are both great setup options. Even though Ancient Power is new, I think it's pretty simple to see that this is another setup card. Gain 4 temporary strength and dexterity. Unupgraded, it's 3. But if you put another setup gem into it, then it's better at what it does. It's a little bit weird because putting a strength or dex gem into it just adds exactly to what it's doing. And if you let me put it like this: if you have 100 strength and you add 2 more, then that 2 more is not doing very much. So the higher you get, so the more of the same kind of thing you add to this, the less powerful it gets. So you're already gaining 3 or 4 temporary strength. If you add 2 more, that's still good, especially if you're relying on this to combo with a multi-hit. That extra strength can be absolutely very good. But at the same time, it might not be as impactful as if you had put, it would not be as impactful as going from 0 to 2 strength would be. So that's something to keep in mind. I don't think that necessarily makes it bad in any situation, just something you have to keep in mind whenever evaluating the strength of your deck overall. Anyways, aside from that, this is actually very close to Vent Steam in terms of what they do. It itself is another card that does nothing. But once it's paired with other things, it does very well. So adding more setup to the card can increase its power exponentially. Pre-program being another 0 cost is great with Quartz. Draw a card. Actually, I didn't even mention that for covering weaknesses earlier. Quartz kind of does both for all of these. Covers weaknesses and does what's best for this, but does what the card does but better. But especially for this pre-program, looking at the top cards of your draw pile and then drawing a card afterwards, the socket happens last, remember? So putting a Quartz into it means that you look at the top 7 cards of your draw pile, then you can choose one of those cards to put into stasis, taking it out of the draw pile, then you draw a card. So you can manipulate your draw pile by taking out by either leaving or taking out the top card of your draw pile with stasis, and then drawing the top card. So you have the option of drawing one of 2 cards at the top. And on top of Quartz already being great in zero-cost cards, this amplifies that even more by letting you choose what card you're drawing. And that's really, really strong. I think Pre-Program is probably one of the best stasis cards, if not the best. I wonder if that has changed. I'll have to see if that's changed with the Accelerate changes. Because putting one card into stasis might actually have gone down in value. We might actually want to do more planning stuff. I think overall this will still be okay. Maybe we can just add more stasis cards rather than rely on planning. So yeah, that's setup. Just to recap. Setup cards are generally the zero-cost cards, and they work well with setup gems, such as the temporary buffs, the vulnerable, and stuff that allows you to play more cards, such as Accelerate, Draw, and Energy. And then the payoff cards. Man, that took a while to explain the setup, but the payoff cards. The payoff cards, I guess, would actually include Tourmaline. Actually, but maybe that doesn't matter in either. I know Sapphire doesn't really matter in either. What do we categorize here? I guess the three payoff ones are Frag Gem, Aquamarine, and Onyx. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like, according to my notes, I only have these three. Fragmented Gem, giving a Shiv, of course, geesh. Giving a Shiv will benefit from the effects of any setup that you've used. So if you socket that into another attack, you've turned that attack into a multi-attack. Like the example that I gave earlier, the Twin Slam and the Temporal Strike. Adding the Crystal Shiv to that means that they scale even more with strength, and that's good. Sometimes. And for similar reasons, Aquamarine is good because it scales with Dexterity. So if you've used Dexterity setup, then Aquamarine can be another way to use that Dexterity all at once. So putting that, we'll talk about the sockets, the socket cards that count as payout. Onyx is also great because any of the temporary buffs, Strength, Dexterity, Thorns, work very well with this as a payout because it allows you to keep those. In theory, you could put this into a setup card, especially like Planning, which has two sockets, or Vent Steam for the same reason. But if you have multiple setup gems with temporary buffs attached to them, having Onyx as the last card you play in the turn is kind of necessary in order to keep those. The card order matters, so socketing this into payout cards is very important to make sure that you don't have to fight your cards in order to play them in the correct order to get the benefits from this. Oh right, okay. So as far as payout goes, all of the one-cost common attacks pretty much count as payout in a mediocre way. And so does Piercing Hide in a way, because it blocks. Although I don't think that's very good with Shiv or Ward. However, it's very good with Onyx since it has Thorns attached to it. So maybe that's not so bad. But yeah, the other ones probably go better in all of these. Prismatic Barrier and Prismatic Spray are also payout cards, big time, because they have multiple gem slots and block and deal damage themselves. That being said, they do have other uses that we'll get to in a minute. And I guess I want to highlight real quick that Twin Slam and Bobble Burst are also very good at being payout. Well, actually just Twin Slam, huh? Bobble Burst only hits once. Yeah, Twin Slam is good because it hits twice. It's already a multi-attack. So it works well paying out from strength. but it also has other uses that we'll get to. So to recap, the payoff, the big payoffs are just the generated cards, the Shiv and the Ward from Fragmented Gem and Aquamarine, but also Onyx. Shiv and Gem will benefit from any strength and dexterity that you've gotten, whether temporary or permanent, and Onyx wants to be played after temporary buffs anyway, later in the turn. So those pair well with payout cards, which also want to be used later in the turn. And the payout cards include the 1-cost attacks, Prismatic Barrier and Prismatic Spray, and Twin Slam in a sense. And then onto the third category that I have here. Gems are also good for creating their own power, and I wanted to talk more about this in depth than just this, but the only way that I could really think to talk about this is with gem combos. So let's take another look at our gems here. Gem combos are probably what comes to mind for a lot of people when they think of gems. I think it is probably the most obvious thing if they were to take a look at the gems to notice, hey, vulnerable, strength, Shiv, those all go together. You can add strength to the Shiv and then play it on a vulnerable target. Those all multiply together. So yeah, those comboing together is an option. That's actually for the same reason that Ruby is good with Ventsteam. Ruby can also be good with Garnet. Fragmented Gem can also be good with Ruby and Garnet. And then another gem combo is Emerald and Aquamarine, having Dexterity and Wards to go together. It was very common before the Aquamarine nerf to uncommon to have an Emerald Aquamarine combo in Twin Slam. Because you would play Twin Slam twice, gain 4 temporary Dexterity, then play both the Wards for 3 plus 4 dex each for 7. So you'd have like a Twin Slam dealing 14 damage as a 2x hit, plus 14 block from Emerald and Aquamarine. So in your starter deck, after having gems in it, you have something that's better than a dash plus when upgraded and have those gems in it. So yeah, there's other ways to create combos too. We talked about the 3 other setup gems: Amber, Quartz, and Citrine. Amber maybe not so much as a combo gem itself. It more combos with Stasis as a cross mechanic synergy. But Quartz and Citrine together are a very strong combo. Probably the strongest gem combo, allowing you to draw a card and gain energy, making most things free and some things positive, make you have a net positive. For example, if you were to put Quartz and Citrine into a Ventsteam, it turns it into a cantrip. It draws a card and does its effect for 0 energy. If you put it into Bauble Burst, it multiplies all of those effects by 3. So you have Bauble Burst, which costs you gain 3 energy, so you've gained an energy, and you draw 3. That's like a super adrenaline, and it doesn't exhaust. And in a similar vein, Twin Slam plus having Citrine and Quartz in it would basically be a 0-cost draw 2 card, and drawing and dealing 14 damage plus whatever strength times 2. So yeah, very strong combo. Another one you could do, I guess, is Tourmaline with Ward. If you have Dexterity attached to the Ward, then that could work. I think Tourmaline Amethyst is slightly better, because Tourmaline works best with multi-attacks, and so does Amethyst. So that is a more situational, but also a pretty good thing. And then the last one that at least I can think of is Onyx with the temporary buff gems. Onyx together with those in the same card, so long as Onyx is socketed second, that's very important. Or third, it's after them, because some of them have more than 2. If it's socketed after the temporary buffs, it will keep those buffs permanently. So yeah, gems can create their own power by comboing with each other in the ways that we just mentioned. Now some of these combos get even better than just what we see here. We mentioned Ventsteam. Planning is another one that has 2. Exploit Gems has 3, and so do these 2. So instead of treating these as payout cards, you could treat them also as gem combo cards, socketing those combos into these. Onyx with 2 temporary buffs, I think, is pretty common for these. But in theory, if you were lucky enough, you could do like Citrine and Quartz combo in those for energy and draw. Of course, the big downside of any of those is just finding gems of those rarities. It makes those combos very rare. But for Bauble Burst and Twin Slam specifically, the fact that those effects get multiplied makes gem combos really, really powerful. Because the gem combos happen more than once. Like I said, with the Dexterity and Ward combo in Twin Slam, I've even done it in Bauble Burst. And the nice thing is that since a Dex and Ward combo in Bauble Burst actually increases faster than linearly. You get more Dex times more wards. So Bauble Burst giving you 6 Dexterity and 3 wards. So wards do block for 3 at base, plus you get 6 Dex for 9 each. And then there's 3 wards, so you get 27. 27 block from Bauble Burst. Remember what we said about Twin Slam? That's 14. Bauble Burst, having 1 more time performed, 3 times over 2, does twice as much block as Twin Slam. That's crazy. And that really highlights the power of gem combos when multiplied by these things. It's still fine to do stuff in Exploit Gems, Vent Steam, these two, Planning. I've done Dex and Ward into Vent Steam as a very safe option for gem combo, giving it 5 block at base, so at least does defense worth of block, and then any other card also gets block. But these multiplied ones do way more. And I wanted to talk about those a bit more. Yeah, okay, so yeah, just to recap, gem combos, there's several of them. Just to recap over them real quick. Ruby, Garnet, Fragmented Gem are all damage ones. Emerald and Aquamarine are block. Amethyst and Tourmaline are a nice little combo based on enemy attacks. Citrine and Quartz, energy and card draw go together to let you play more cards. And Onyx works with all the temporary gems so long as Onyx is socketed after these. So yeah. And of course, Twin Slam and Bauble Burst both amplify those effects. I can actually leave this up for a little bit longer now, because I can just talk about Twin Slam and Bauble Burst normally. We talked about how gem combos are really strong in them, but honestly, you can put, like I said earlier, that you can put gems in pretty much anything, but Twin Slam and Bauble Burst especially, you can do most gems. Because they multiply the effects, you can capitalize on the strengths of those gems a lot more easily. Twin Slam and Bauble Burst could both be payouts. You could just put shivs and wards into them and they'd be fine, as long as you have the buffs to support them. But, as we mentioned before, they can also be gem combos, but they can even be setup. You could put a strength and a dex into Bauble Burst and you could still make use of it, because it gains 6 strength and 6 dexterity. That's huge, even if it's for 2 energy. That's actually double of the, it's funny, that's double the effectiveness of Ancient Power for 2 energy. That makes sense. And Twin Slam, similarly, can do the same thing. Because you're not just getting added value, you're getting multiplied value out of having those setup gems trigger multiple times. The one thing that I will say about those is that the worst gem by far for them, I think, is Sapphire, the one that braces for 4. And this has to do with how defensive mode works in general. I'm not going to go in depth into this, but I will cover it real quick. Defensive mode and Brace have this weird relationship that's hard to really understand, but the main thing is that although Brace is important in order to get into defensive eventually in a fight, it does nothing unless you enter defensive. So if I have 20 Brace to enter defensive and I Brace for 4, I've done nothing. So if we were to socket a Sapphire into Twin Slam, you would be bracing for 8. And you need to brace for 20 to enter defensive mode even once. That's changed with the Starter Relic upgrade, giving you Gear Up. Gear Up plus Curl Up is 20 brace by themselves, so it wouldn't matter if you put a Sapphire into Twin Slam. Even if you upgraded Curl Up, as soon as you draw Curl Up, you can just play Gear Up with it anyways. So yeah, having the brace in Twin Slam would be a desperation play, because Sapphire is the only gem that can't be comboed with anything, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure every other gem has a combo. We can review that real quick, actually. These both have these. Tourmaline has Amethyst. Garnet has this. Oh, Amber's the other one, but Amber has its own strengths. Accelerating twice is actually really strong in Twin Slam and Bubble Burst as well. 3 times in Bubble Burst. Yeah, and these both have combos. Quartz, temporary buffs. Yeah, Sapphire is by far the worst to put into Twin Slam. If you brace for 8. That can be good for getting back into defensive later in a fight, but not really the first. Not really the first go until you find, I guess, more brace cards. You would really, really need to want defensive mode a lot, and I don't think you're going to be in that position very often. And like I said, every other gem has a combo except for Amber, which is fine by itself. Amber is kind of like Quartz and Citrine mixed into one, but less anyway, so Twin Slam Amber is good for that reason. But since Brace has nothing to combo with, you can't really multiply the strength of Brace by any other thing. So not only is it not doing very much on its own, it can't really be capitalized on that easily. It would have to be part of a larger overall deck thing, where you need the Brace in order to stay safe, in order for that to be viable. I think most of the time you are not going to want to socket Sapphire into Twin Slam. And the same argument for Bubble Burst, but even more so because gem combos are even stronger in Bubble Burst. Setup is stronger in Bubble Burst. Payouts are stronger in Bubble Burst. Everything is stronger except for Sapphire. The only advantage Sapphire has with Bubble Burst is that if you somehow socket 2 of them into Bubble Burst, that braces for 24, which is probably going to get you into defensive mode. Twin Slam even does 16 with 2 Sapphires, so that doesn't even get you into defensive mode by itself. I suppose it would with Gear Up, but even that's situational. Yeah, overall, those things are good with. They're not great with Sapphire. They would be really situational for you to want to do that, but you can socket pretty much anything into them, and they will be really, really strong. So these are probably my 2 favorite Guardian cards. I think Twin Slam slightly more so, because Bubble Burst is kind of hard to get to work the way you want it to. Or it requires a lot more work to get it to work. The payout's pretty much always worth it. It's not like the card is mediocre. It's definitely very strong. Twin Slam is probably still my favorite, though. And that just leaves the Starter Relic now, I think. Let me just check my notes again. Right. So the Starter Relic. At the start of combat, gain Gear Up. We already sort of mentioned that. Guardian starts to run with a random common gem. It gets put right into your deck as an extra card. Guardian starts with 10 cards in the deck. You have your 4 strikes, your 4 defends, Curl Up, and Twin Slam. And if you're on Ascension 10 or higher, you also have Ascender's Bane for 11. So that gem is either the 11th or 12th card in the deck. And since it's not very... since gems are not... especially common gems are not very impactful as 0-cost cards, it makes your deck a bit worse at the beginning of the game, unless you're in downfall mode and can socket it immediately. That that would be, I guess, another upside of socketing Sapphire into Twin Slam. You don't have a dead card in your deck. It's definitely something to think about because starting with that gem in your deck is not good if you. It can be a bad thing to have an unsocketed gem. So usually, if you're in downfall mode, you want to go to that first campfire and socket it there. The four commons are, I guess we're going to take a look at them. Ruby, Emerald, Tourmaline, and Sapphire, since this got swapped with Aquamarine. Starting with Strength means that you can lean a bit more into attack cards, especially early. That's pretty good. Emerald means that you'll be a little bit safer because if you socket that into Twin Slam, then if you draw that with Defense, then you can do the damage of Twin Slam and get the defense, get extra block from Defense or other block cards, and get the best of both worlds. Get to do damage and block. Tourmaline, I think, is a little bit underrated as a starting gem. If that goes into Twin Slam, you gain 8 Thorns. That's an extra 8 damage, straight up. Even Ruby can't do that with 4 temporary strength, unless you're playing at least 2 attacks. You would need to use Ruby twice anyway. But Tourmaline does a lot of early game damage if you can get that into a Twin Slam. Since I'm going up the Spire now, I might find better gems for Twin Slam early on in the game, so I'd have to find something else to put Tourmaline in. Thankfully, that's probably what Strike for Strike is for. Yeah. Enemy attacks you for 3 damage. Put a Thorns into that. Get you some free damage. And Sapphire definitely has to be part of a larger plan to brace into defensive mode more frequently. Oh, I didn't even cover Sapphire earlier. I guess we'll do it now. There's one more thing that Sapphire is good for. Sapphire, since it braces 4, like I said, it does nothing unless you enter defensive mode. But if you socket it into a card that already has brace attached to it, like Piercing Hide or Roll Attack, is that it actually? Yeah, one of those two. No, there's Priming Shot here. All 3 of those have brace already on them. And of course, these have the same problem, that if you brace for those numbers and you don't enter defensive, you've done essentially nothing. But if you add Sapphire to them, you've increased the brace number for that one card. And that makes it a lot more likely for you to enter defensive mode with that card, meaning that the brace does do something. Especially with Roll Attack and Priming Shot, these have big brace numbers attached to them. Priming Shot makes you... Priming Shot plus is 6, Priming Shot minus is 4. Bracing for 8 is still a lot. I think bracing for 8 is some of the best, is like the baseline for really having effective brace numbers in this game. Roll Attack, Shield Spikes, and what's the last one called? Resilient Plate, all brace for 8. And they're all really effective at getting you back into defensive really fast and really consistently. So putting Sapphire into a Priming Shot minus for brace 8 is already good. Putting it into Priming Shot plus for brace 10 is even better, because then it works with your gear up by itself. And even just having the 2 extra brace makes you get back into defensive mode later in the fight easier. And Roll Attack bracing for 12, well, that just makes it even more synergistic, because not only will you go into defensive with gear up, but you will go into defensive with other Roll Attacks, or Shield Spikes, or Resilient Plates, because this will have 12 brace, and those other cards will have 8, equaling 20. Yeah, so that's kind of the baseline that I think of, because in order to enter defensive mode for the first time, you need 20 brace. That probably gets a little bit less with gear up, but getting into defensive mode fast is still important. Bracing for 10 on a card with gear up gets you into defensive for that 10 block, plus the block on the next turn, plus the Thorns, plus the blur in case you're not even being attacked that turn. So yeah, just having the extra control over defensive mode and being able to more consistently enter it with the cards that already brace can be a very valid use of Sapphire. So I think if you start with Sapphire, you might not want to put it into Twin Slam. Maybe you will just to get out of your deck, like I said before. But if you don't, you can probably wait for one of those 3 common brace cards and then just sock it into one of those. And then it'll be just fine. Especially since it's got a slight buff to its brace. 4. 4 is significantly better than 3 because of how the brace numbers work. I'll get to that in the defensive mode guide in 10 or 20 episodes. So yeah, that's about that. The nice thing about these 3, though, is that socketing them into Twin Slam, since they are your very first gem, it allows you to build into those gem combos like I mentioned before. And getting a very early start on that means that as soon as you get one of those gem combos, you are in a significantly better spot than if you just didn't have the gem. I'm personally a fan of that part of Bronze Gear, even though it gives you a gem that that clogs up your deck a little bit if you don't socket it. I think it's still nice to have that little bit of a head start into doing some of the more fun things that Guardian has to do. I think gems are probably my favorite part of Guardian overall, and the dev team has said that they are working on improving them even further in the future in certain ways. So I'm very excited to see how that pans out. I guess the last thing I want to say about this is my own personal strategy with Ruby specifically. Ruby, I do not socket into Twin Slam, and I've mentioned this several times in my episodes, and I've explained it several times, but this is the time to explain it, and then I never explain it again unless someone asks in the comments. Ruby in Twin Slam. Let's just do a little bit of math here. Thank you, Ocean, by the way, for both your pencil case mods, your calculator, and your drawing. Both immensely helpful. If I put this over these, it's going to trigger them. Let's actually do this. There we go. So you start with your unupgraded Twin Slam. Let's just go with that for a baseline. You do 5 damage, then you gain strength afterwards. Remember, the socket effects always come last. So you gain 2 strength. Your next hit does 7 damage. And then, let's say at the beginning of the game, you only have 3 energy. You play a strike. You now have 4 strength plus that strike for 10 damage. 6 plus 4 is 10. You've done 22 damage. Okay? So keep that number in mind. 22. Frostprime reference. Anyways, now let's say you have that Ruby unsocketed, and you still draw the hand with a Twin Slam and a strike. So you play your Ruby first. You gain 2 strength. You now have 7. Wait, no, I did this right. 7 plus 7, since both hits of Twin Slam hit for 5 normally, they will be both 7. And then you play a strike for 8. You'll notice that the strike does less damage, but the first hit of Twin Slam does more damage, and you still end up with 22. So that means that socketing the Ruby and not socketing the Ruby is essentially the same damage. So in order to properly assess how the Ruby is affecting your deck, whether socketed or unsocketed, you need to look at the other effects. As we said before, leaving the Ruby unsocketed is another card in your deck. It's a 0-cost, low-impact card that will eat up a draw on one of your turns, or multiple of your turns if you're shuffling the deck, which happens a lot in the early game. And if the enemies are attacking, that's you have a less chance of being able to use it. There's some inconsistencies, as well as sometimes you just draw attacks on your turn. But the other upside is that you have actually more flexibility with your Ruby. Let's say you don't want to play Twin Slam, but you have the Ruby socketed in it. Suddenly you've played Twin Slam maybe just once. You've played it for 5 damage. You play one strike for 8, and defend. That's done 13 damage and blocked. Or maybe you can't even. Or maybe you need to block twice with defense for 10 and then play an attack. playing a 2 defense plus the attack will be 6 damage because you don't want to play the Twin Slam with the Ruby in it. But if you have the Ruby unsocketed, you can actually play the Ruby, the 2 defense, and the strike for 8 damage, so a little bit higher. That I understand if that doesn't seem very compelling, but there's one more big reason. You can socket the Ruby into some other card. As we mentioned before, putting setup cards into setup putting setup gems into setup socketed cards is really, really powerful. Vent Steam, especially being a common card, is the best combo for strength, and I've done this several times. Leaving the Ruby unsocketed has allowed me to put it into Vent Steam, and then whenever I draw the Vent Steam, I get that extra damage from strength as well as the vulnerable, so that's great. And in fact, socketing the Ruby into Twin Slam even amplifies the downsides the further you get into the game. Because let's say you get the Vent Steam, now you have the Ruby socketed into the Twin Slam instead of the Vent Steam. You play the Twin Slam once for, I guess, 10 damage since it's upgraded. You don't get that extra bonus damage from the strength. If you had left it unsocketed, you can socket it into the Vent Steam, then play Twin Slam for 13 on its first hit. So yeah, you have more versatility. You also leave Twin Slam open to other gem combos or other payouts. And I think that this overall does better. And I think for the same reason you can just socket it into Planning or Suspension and still have that better flexibility than putting it into Twin Slam. However, I can understand if you still want to put it into Twin Slam to get it out of your deck early, or if you think that the upsides of putting it into Twin Slam are not that, or if you think the downsides of putting it into Twin Slam are not that different, or not that punishing. Overall, it's up to you. This is just my personal opinion on how to do it. You can even, and like I said, you can even put it in Temporal Strike since it's a 0 cost. It's not the best option because you'd rather put it into some other card and then play the Temporal Strike. Oh yeah, the pre-program also counts, and so does Ancient Power. But you get the idea. Exploit gems. I would say that Bauble Burst is an exception because you're going to get Bauble Burst later in the game. You're going to have a better idea of what you're doing with your deck and what you need to do. So if you need to gain 6 strength all at once, maybe that's fine putting into Bauble Burst. And then maybe putting an Onyx in it so you gain a permanent 3 strength. Maybe you're doing stasis things, so Bubble Burst comes out as a 0 cost anyway. That's a unique advantage that Twin Slam doesn't have, because the second Slam, is always 1 cost. So yeah. Bubble Burst, not necessarily the same as Twin Slam. It's pretty interesting, honestly, that that cards that seem like they have such similar effects actually have that kind of nuance. Also, you can also put the Strength Gem into Piercing Hide or Prismatic Barrier as other setup cards. I think between all of these options, you just have enough possibilities to keep it out of Twin Slam, put some other strong thing in there, give it a chance to be defensive instead of offensive, so that if you draw this without much block in hand, you can still be somewhat safe. I think it just leaves you open to a lot of possibilities by keeping the Strength Gem out. That's pretty much everything. I'll let you take a look at these again. Like I said, I'm not... I do not know absolutely everything there is to know about gems. Someone could find more ways to use gems than I know how to use them. I didn't even go over Amber very much, but I think that's a lot more of a stasis thing. I guess the only thing you really need to know about Amber is that Accelerate is good because stasis is good. Getting free cards into hand is powerful. You'll see how powerful in a later episode. Or if you watch my previous episodes and see how I use stasis. But yeah, people could find new ways to use gems that I haven't covered here, or they could improve upon what I've said, or they could prove something that I've said completely wrong. Maybe it is better to put the Strength Gem into Twin Slam after you do a long analysis of it. there could be considerations for draw consistency and how much that affects the early parts of your run, especially like against Gremlin Knob or Sentries. That could be a bad thing, or against any of the hardcore hallway fights. Just drawing a 0 cost that doesn't block is not good. But overall, I think I've covered this as best that I can, and and for the most part, this pretty much the way that I've said that I think gems can be used here, for the most part, that covers how well that covers me being able to use gems in my own games really well. I'm almost never at a loss at how to use a gem in my games. I've always got some kind of plan figured out for them. Even if not immediately, I have ways to find sockets for those gems. Like if you got random ones somehow, I know I can make plans on how to use them. So I think that if you want to use this guide, it's adequate, at least. It's probably a lot better than adequate. Not trying to be disingenuous to myself, but overall, I really hope that this is helpful to you. I hope that I've explained myself coherently and that you've learned something that will help you improve at Guardian. And whenever you improve in STS, the game gets a lot more fun. In my experience, it's the kind of game that really rewards you for doing well. You get to see all sorts of cool combos and see the inner workings of how your decisions affect the game over and over. And I know some people are climbing Ascension on this character too. They've said that they've climbed Ascension because I've been doing this series. So I really hope that this helps with all of that. Let me know if it does. I really want to see feedback on these videos about both about how it's helping you and about your own viewpoints on these things. I really enjoy doing this series for any feedback I get. So yeah, that's going to be it for this one. And stay tuned for the next two. I don't know if it was a good idea to make these bonus episodes for 50 and 60 runs, because they're going to be very few. They're going to be it's going to be a while before we get to them. It's going to be almost a month in between these. I think I might need that time anyways. I haven't really made an extensive guide on defensive mode or stasis. All of this stuff, pretty much all of this stuff is. I wrote a guide for this a long time ago. The Downfall Discord has a tips document that is available for anyone to edit. That I wrote a gem guide for that is almost exactly like this, with a few minor changes, of course. When I wrote that, Aquamarine was still uncommon and Sapphire was still uncommon. And yeah, I have the gem guide written. I don't have defensive mode or stasis written. So we'll have to wait for those. Hope to see you in those episodes though. So if I do, I'll see you later.